Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Securing Your Endpoints with Carbon Black, a SANS review of the CB Predictive Security Cloud platform, sponsored by Carbon Black. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Shackleford, SANS Analyst, Instructor, and Course Author, and Tristan Morris, Security Strategist for Carbon Black. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol, and thanks everybody for joining us today. These types of webcasts are usually pretty fun because we get to go back and talk about the stuff that we played around with and got our hands on the technology. And this is all about the technology. So I'm excited to be here with the folks from Carbon Black. Really had a great time going through this review. And for those of you that might be familiar with some of our past work here, you know that we've actually done some reviews of Carbon Black in the past. And it's always exciting to see what they've been up to and see the new technology that they've come out and actually released. So this was a great review. And what I'd like to do is really go through and explain not only what we did in the review, obviously, but some of the really key features that we had an opportunity to get our hands on. I'm going to be joined by Tristan, and I'm going to be handing things over to him after I go through and give you guys the skinny on how things were and what I saw and explain my general perception of all these things. But Tristan's going to take you guys through a little more sort of in-depth and involved look at the product itself that sort of shows you guys from their perspective some other things too. So let's jump right in and get to it. So, I always tend to start these presentations with sort of my Captain Obvious slide, right? The one that's like, hey, things are bad or whatever. I don't need to tell you guys that things are bad. In fact, this is, an assumption I think we all make in the industry today. And I really don't like those slides that are generically like things are bad. But what we're seeing is a little bit more complex at the endpoint. So we've done some reviews and some surveys at SANS, and our endpoint protection and response survey from 2018 had some really interesting and salient data points that I think tied into what we kept in the back of our head as we were going through and looking at the Carbon Black product. And we know that people have lots of compromise at the endpoint. That's a given. So 42%, saying, hey, we were compromised didn't surprise us at all. 20% not knowing if their endpoints had been compromised, that's not good. Certainly, we'd like to think that people have a better perception and awareness of what's going on within their environments, but it's tough, especially in big shops. We found that 20% came back and said they discovered issues by being proactive and doing some threat hunting. And we also saw that a little over 15% only found endpoint compromised because somebody else came and told them so. And these are really interesting points, but none of them were that surprising. I was glad to see that there was a bit more proactive hunting going on. I think we all know that's a trend that is starting to really take hold within the enterprise, and for very good reason. We need to get ahead of things. But I'll tell you what sort of shook out as well. And having been in the industry for a long time, this is, sort of an interesting twist at the endpoint. But what we see is just too much going on. So everybody has something at the endpoint or have had something at the endpoint. Very often we find people just desperately juggling lots of endpoint products and agents. There's a lot of complexity there. And honestly, I don't know that people are getting great protection either. So it's sort of a bad story at the endpoint for a lot of organizations. And in fact, I can really corroborate this from students I talk to in my classes and consulting clients. There's a lot of frustration with the state of endpoint security and sort of what it has been. And I think a lot of organizations think there's got to be a better way. And that was one of the things I really looked at in this review, sort of asking, is this a better way? Are there some definitive features here that stand out to alleviate or potentially solve some of those challenges and problems? And I found that there's really some merit in consolidation. And I'll explain that as we go along. But, to sort of get ahead of things here, the Carbon Black platform, I mean, many of you guys know Carbon Black. They're certainly one of the leaders in this space, and they've been doing a lot of interesting work for years. What they have now is even more capabilities converged into a unified platform, which is exactly what I think people need. I don't necessarily think it's a great idea to scatter your endpoint strategy to the winds and install a whole bunch of stuff. And not to mention, especially given the shift towards cloud computing and the resource consumption challenges we've always faced at the endpoint, nobody loves you when you have a bunch of agents, and especially heavy-handed agents. So it was nice to see that the Carbon Black Predictive Security Cloud platform actually has got a nice, very lightweight agent that really is extraordinarily easy to set up. So that was great. The console has shifted to a cloud-based console, which is the trend in the industry, and I would expect that. And certainly many organizations prefer that over having to go and set up a internal infrastructure and then maintain it and patch it and deal with it and so forth. So that's again, I think, sort of nice. Huge processing engine. I'll get into all this as we go along, but just the back end scale of what these guys are operating is pretty huge and gives you an intense capacity for solving some of these problems, finding things, doing hunting, you name it. And they've also got a lot of APIs to integrate into other tools and other parts of your security operational stack. And I think that's also huge. The endpoint is interwoven through everything we do in the field of security, and we've got to be aware that we need more automation, we need more ties from one tool to the next, instead of having these things also siloed. So all good news, and really just obviously a smart group of people sitting around coming up with better ways to improve an already great product and make that, ideally a bit more integrated and capable from just the standpoint of what it can do today. And so, I looked at this and said, what do I need as an analyst? And I'm not talking as a SANS analyst. I'm talking to somebody in the trenches, somebody that's actually fighting the fight, which is probably a lot of you guys out there. I need a lot of capabilities now. I need the whole next gen AV. The old school AV isn't cutting it, so let's go to next gen. That's fine. I need vastly improved detection and response capabilities at the endpoint. So the whole EDR concept has really taken root, and I think we all know that now. So the combination of those two alone really comprises the bulk of what we need from a starting standpoint. Like, I don't think you can get by without that any longer. I think you need the AV, and I think you need the EDR, especially at scale. So you need something that can reach out and touch these endpoints and help you solve problems. I think you need some threat hunting capabilities and incident response capabilities tied into a product, and preferably through some workflow engines and analysis capabilities. You need to be able to query the endpoint. So I need to go find out what's going on. And I need to do that probably in a couple different capacities, depending on the teams I'm working with. And I also need to be able to manage the alerts and sort of triage through that as a SOC operator, or even as a help desk analyst or others. And, I need to be able to handle this in virtual data centers too. Within the virtual infrastructure, I need this. Within cloud environments, I need this. You name it, we've got to be able to get that uniform coverage. So all of this matters. And I always start by just diving right in. I mean, that's always my preferred mode. I'm not reading the instruction manual. I'm I'm jumping off the cliff here and just seeing what my initial impression is. And my initial impression is always looked at through the lens of, can I see what's going on and get a sense of that very, very quickly? In other words, is the interface too cluttered? Are there a million buttons and blinky things that I'm going to have to figure out? Or can I jump in, see what's what, look categorically at some of the dashboard widgets, find out where I'm going, and ideally click my way to glory pretty quickly? And the answer is unequivocally yes. Honestly, I think I wouldn't say it's a Spartan dashboard approach, and you'll see that very shortly. But there's very obvious efforts to streamline this to a high degree. In fact, it's the antithesis of cluttered. You can really make this dashboard whatever you want, and you can customize that. And we did some of that too. So we got in and did a little tinkering. But the big thing that stood out to me was just how quickly and easily I could jump in and see these major sort of categories of things. So we see attacks that got stopped. We see, some of these different activities that are going on in the environment that are suspicious. We see attack phases that might be of interest and things within those attack phases that we can jump straight to. We've got attacks by vector. Like, you can break this down easily to give yourself a sense of the most important information and have it very readily available. And that's what any analyst team would want to do. Right out of the gate, I want to make sure that I can find stuff and find it quick and then dig deeper very rapidly. And as a SOC operator, that is exactly the approach that I would take. Now, I mentioned a SOC operator, and I think naturally that's what a lot of you guys would come to this webcast expecting. I need to be able to make sure the security ops team can get in and sort of do what they have to do. But what we actually decided on when we were discussing the approach to this review was sort of taking a bit of a different approach and saying, hey, look, I want to look at this from the lens of a couple different users, because I think there's a broader brush to sort of look at this product through. I mean, obviously you've got the security analysts and the SOC teams, the people who are going to be escalating and, kicking off investigations. That's, I think, maybe a primary use case for sure, but we're increasingly seeing the streamlining of that security ops center to incorporate IR teams and threat hunting teams. And if all of us can benefit from a singular platform, that's a big benefit, right? I mean, again, that's a huge win for us, not having to go to 18 different places to get our jobs done, or at least to be able to do a lot of the things that we need to as part of that function. And so we included a little bit of a different take with IR teams and threat hunting teams. So they're going to need to get in and sort of see that, they can configure the dashboards for different devices, for example, and applications, and see, some of the different things at the endpoint than maybe what a traditional security analyst would want to look for right out of the gate. I also looked at this through the lens of a desktop admin. Now, is a desktop admin going to be spending a ton of time with a security product? Well, that depends on the organization, of course, but you're certainly going to have desktop admins that need to be involved and to focus on attacks that do get stopped and find out whether there are issues at endpoints that might have some relationship to security problems and so forth. So, yeah, I do think that they're going to need to be a key use case. And so we made sure we took a look at this from their standpoint as well, really from endpoint health, top applications that are going on in the environment. That's important data to make sure we know what's happening and being able to pull that inventory and potential sort of problem remediation too. So a couple different scenarios that we included and really just sort of explored the product in the light of what these types of folks would want to do or what they'd need to do. So first things first, took the security approach, obviously jumped right in, and we started looking for activity in the alerts panes. So that's where you're probably going to start as a traditional security analyst who's putting this up on a big dashboard in the SOC and basically looking at things that are coming in real time. So that's exactly what we wanted to do. We looked for that activity in the alerts pane, and what we did is we went in and saw some of the different ways that we can slice and dice this information. And so we could see different types of monitoring, we could see categories of information, we could break it down by different types of devices, we could look at applications, we could look at the different workflow stages as far as, again, where things were going through and working through some of the investigation stages that we might be in. So all of these ways, and you can sort of see it on the left-hand side, there's this nice little menu system over there where we can pick and choose how we want the alerts and how we want that activity to show up. And of course, especially in a busy environment, the more ways I have to be able to divvy up that data and be able to slice and dice it and look at it quickly makes all the difference in the world. I don't want to have to go wade through every event, every data type. So having those filters, huge. And it's very quick and easy to use. And so we jumped in and sort of immediately started taking stock of what was showing up in our test bed. And we had a pretty nice test bed environment that had some different types of, sort of attacks going on. We executed a few different malware scenarios. We had a lot of fun with this, actually. We went through some pretty cool attack sort of workflows that a traditional attacker might go through. And again, we'll get into that in just a bit. So that was the first starting point. we want to see that next gen AV, that EDR capability right coming to the surface and showing us, hey, here's something that looks interesting. And as an analyst, naturally, the next place you're probably going to want to go is looking at the execution flow of the attack. So if something's going on, and I think I've got something that bears, investigation and something I need to go look into, well, I need to jump into that. I need to find out what's going on quickly, and I need to try to find out what happened or what was attempted, and follow it through and see exactly what happened at the endpoint and see it ideally in a usable format. So to me, this whole concept of alert triage is critical. And as you can see here, now, again, this is, these screenshots are always sort of difficult. I know Tristan will actually give you a little more detail on some of this, but, this is a great attack workflow where there's numerous stages of execution that show processes that are being executed or attempting to be executed. You can see things that are launching PowerShell and trying to do some other nefarious deeds. And so this is flagged as malware. And so, of course, we want to go and dig in and find out whether there's any communication that's being attempted or processes that are being started or files that are being dropped. Those kinds of things all matter. But the level of detail is enormous. And we can click into pretty much any place in here and sort of dig in further to find out more details about exactly what's going on as needed. But this is always going to be my starting point as an analyst. Let's dig in. Let's find out what's actually happening in this environment. First attack scenario that we went through, we saw some really interesting elements. And, this is one of the things I really enjoyed about this review too, is that the Carbon Black team just is out there doing this stuff and they know what's going on. I really felt that the attack scenarios we went through were pretty realistic, actually. There wasn't a sense of it being sort of contrived or far-fetched, because I've actually seen things like this in the wild, and I'd be willing to bet that many of you have as well. We saw Outlook, of course, the culprit here, opening Excel. So somebody got maybe a spreadsheet that was included here. Excel fired off PowerShell. That's not normal. That's not exactly what we would expect to see. And given that it was Outlook that opened Excel, and then Excel starting PowerShell, you immediately get the spidey sense tingling. And if that wasn't enough, what happens afterward most certainly is, because PowerShell tries to communicate out to a remote system, tries to access Microsoft executables, tries to drop files, and we can see the hashes and so forth for that, and then go back and compare it against the sort of massive database that the Carbon Black team has in place. And all of this is immediately displayed and very quickly able to be analyzed. And what's also cool is that we can even save evidence right out of the dashboards. We could grab some, evidence like the files that were attempted to be dropped and all that. You can even quarantine the system directly out of here. So that was one of the things I like too. As an analyst, if I see something like this happening, I might have a need to put that system in a hole for a minute while I figure it out, and I don't want the problem to get any worse. And especially given things like ransomware attacks, where this stuff starts, it actually takes me back to the old days. This is how I know I'm old, right? Like I go back to the old days of viruses and worms, and that whole notion of the fast-spreading worm felt like it had died for a while, but it's back actually with things like ransomware attacks. So if I see something that looks like it could have the ability to spread rapidly through an infection, I need to put this system in the hole. So I can't. And that was another nice thing that I liked about the console, was it was super easy to do that. So you could do all sorts of other things here in the console too. Operationally speaking, I could do, automatic whitelisting or flag bad processes. I could look at files or IP addresses. So any of those things could be, basically whitelisted or definitively shown to be bad. And then I can, of course, go automatically submit binaries for analysis in a sandbox that's operated by these guys too. So I go, okay, well, wait, I can break this thing down even further. And that's great for me, where I can go and do some analysis to get really, really, really granular indicators and things that could help me further my investigations or my threat hunting activities. So all of this, really simple to find, really easy to get to. We had a lot of fun just sort of digging around, and it just didn't take long for us to see some of these capabilities right there in front of us. The ransomware scenario, which is really the one that I was excited about, because it was it's just hitting everybody right now. So I wanted to make sure we had a ransomware scenario involved, and the Carbon Black team delivered. They have a whole bunch of really great stuff that they put together to make a realistic attack scenario. And so this is just a starting point, going back to the sort of visualization engine that pulls apart the attack workflow and what's going on. And I think you can tell just by looking here, there's a little bit more sophistication to this one. There's a whole lot of things going on this system. And so this is, again, a case where we've got PowerShell trying to execute and do a whole bunch of things. You've got, attempted file access. I mean, just anything you can imagine, pretty traditional ransomware type situation. But one of the things that we got to dig into even further here, which was awesome, was the alert origin sort of widget that's in the dashboard too. And what this is sort of this deep analytics breakdown of exactly what's being noted based on the experience that Carbon Black brings. And so they kind of pinpoint this into a nice visual graph that shows the behaviors exhibited based on the attack. And you can see these labeled here. And I obviously won't read all those to you, but it's things that you would exactly expect to have been seen before and sort of mapped to particular attack strategies and scenarios. And that's exactly what's happening. So you can see here that you've got this thing trying to do encryption. It's got packed code. It's trying to access files. It's trying to run apps. It's trying to drop malware. It's trying to do a whole bunch, but that in particular, the encryption piece is what gets it immediately flagged as likely ransomware, because that's a very strong conditional element of what a ransomware attack would normally do. And so you can sort of see this cool way of breaking it down. Really liked this. I thought it was one of those types of things you could immediately jump in and go, yeah, this is pretty cool, actually. It sort of shows me a lot of detail in one place rapidly. We went in and dug in policies too. And now we didn't do extensive customization of policies during this review, but we did do some edits and updates to accommodate for stuff. So we came in and did some customization of the standard policy that we had coming into this review and said, okay, we need to add an application path. And what we did was match anything that came out as excel.exe and then selected the deny operation. So you can see this, we don't want to see Excel, in other words, invoking command interpreters like PowerShell. There's just no good reason for this. So we're explicitly denying that operation because it's not a normal one for us and probably for most organizations. But if you take a look at the way that these are broken down, in fact, this was one of the coolest things that I saw having seen Carbon Black in the past. I really liked the layout of this policy engine because it's just intuitive. And what I really like here too is that, I don't think it would take an expert level analyst, getting into like a tier 3 or a team lead situation to have a pretty strong sense of what these policies entail and how they could apply. I think you could very easily take, any number of different tiers or levels of analysts and have them go, oh yeah, I can see exactly what's going on here. And you can tie this immediately back to those attack chains that we were just looking at. So we definitely found it easy to customize these policies within the Carbon Black product. We can also go in and set up some of the different scanning engines and things, and you can have it scan aggressively. You can make sure it goes and gets signature updates. Obviously you've got to go get signatures and things for some of the next gen AV, but that's only part of it, right? The other aspects of the local scanning were really more towards the behavioral aspects, what's actually going on here, and sort of what activities are being exhibited at the endpoint based on what's known to be quote unquote normal or not normal. So there were a whole lot of factors that made this super easy to configure and set up. But as I said, we really didn't go do super extensive policy updates. We just tinkered a little bit and sort of updated some things that then reflected the attack scenarios we were going through. So we also wanted to check out some of the threat hunting capabilities within the product. And so going back to what we saw at the beginning, in our first scenario, we had a phishing email that caused some dangerous executions of processes. We went into the investigate tab here in the product and basically looked for anything that had Outlook as a parent. So we wanted to find out what started from Outlook. And so this was pretty easy. We had a search query of, as you can see here, the parent name is Outlook EXE. And that alone was sort of useful and immediately broke down some of the things that were showing up in the environment. But we went even further than that and sort of amended the query to not only have the parent name of Outlook, but we wanted to see a child process name that was PowerShell EXE. And this actually got us real close to finding those exact specific attack scenarios. And that's the whole idea, is you're looking for a little more granular query to get you right there, and preferably as quickly as possible. So as you can see here, we've got Outlook starting things, PowerShell being invoked at some point as a child, and then you can see Excel is sort of sitting here in the middle. And so we already knew that naturally, but it's cool to be able to go in and find that in the query engine. And as a security team, you would obviously build a bunch of these queries and sort of have them available for you so that you could go in and immediately start perusing all the different data types and events that are showing up in the product and sort of get to that information more rapidly. So as a threat hunter, loved this. If you got IR teams or people that are investigating and going out actively looking for things based on threat intel or things seen in the wild, or just even digging into the alerts that are going on in the environment, having these types of interfaces with a quick query engine just, it's a lifesaver. And so this just shows us some of the threat hunting activities where we can take really broken down output and say, okay, here's what we just found. Let's go in and sort of follow it through the attack chain that's being invoked or attempted. And sure enough, there's that starting point of Outlook as the parent process. Here's Excel in the middle. There's PowerShell showing up as the child process. And then, of course, PowerShell is trying to do all sorts of terrible, horrible things. And you have a lot of ways that you can dig into that and get additional data that helps you go perform more thorough and sort of granular hunting activities. And so here's another feature that we dug into, which I thought was really cool. Basically the live response. And so what live response allows you to do in like a real, we're under fire situation, is to create sort of a mini console on the system running in memory that allows us to go find things immediately and start digging in. And so here you can see we're going and looking for things like scheduled tasks on the system. We've got a whole sort of customized command shell operation that we can use that gives us that ability to dig in on suspect or compromised machines and really find out what's going on right there. So instead of just relying on the data that's being fed back in, we can go touch those systems and potentially do something, whether that's acquiring evidence or just trying to get additional details. Having that right through the console was huge. So this was, again, another really cool feature that we explored a little bit. And the other part of that was, really digging in and using the OSQuery investigation engine. And if you guys haven't ever heard of that, it was a tool that was originally crafted and released by Facebook for their own purposes, but it's extraordinarily powerful. And it basically allows you to go and do like real-time capture of anything on a system. And so what we liked about this was, you're not waiting for something malicious. You're not waiting for something to immediately be suspect. We can go out and actively and proactively look for stuff. We can go look for, certain application versions that we now know might be vulnerable. We can go look for systems that have, applications or things installed that shouldn't be there. We can go look for registry keys or files. Like, you can basically query anything you want at the endpoint, and it's extraordinarily lightweight and fast. And the folks at Carbon Black basically incorporated that into their live query tool, which is awesome. And just, again, gave us a very, very powerful interface for going and pulling back information. And this, to me, was sort of cool in the context of maybe like a desktop analyst that just needs to go find some things, or again, potentially a threat hunter that's proactively going out and looking for information that's relevant in an investigation or that could be indicative of bigger, deeper and more pervasive problems in the environment. So it was really nice to be able to see the flexibility that this tool brought to the table. It gave us the, query builder. You can then save those and, resend them out as you need to. And for me, I always put that back into the context of maybe like a tier one analyst too, in whatever capacity. Maybe they're going to have some of these queries created for them, but they can go quickly jump in, find some things, and then escalate as needed. And having the interface to do that, I think, is huge. There's another whole aspect to Carbon Black too, which is the Carbon Black user exchange, meaning you come up with a really cool query, share it. And we didn't really go explore a lot of this. This just wasn't 100% in scope for the review, but we did sort of shop around in there and take a look at it. And, you know, it was pretty cool just to see the community rallying around helping one another and, you know, sharing some of the things that they got value from as they were creating the queries in the product. So that's nice. I like having a community around a product where somebody else is going to have seen it before and they're sharing that information and you can do the same. So that was another cool feature, but again, not necessarily one that we dug down into that far. So this was a great review. In fact, this is one of the smoothest reviews I think we've done in recent memory, where there just weren't any hiccups. It was, you know, very well orchestrated. Test bed environment was well set up and ready to rock. We had some really cool attack scenarios mapped out that we had an opportunity to go through. You know, the product was easy to get into. I mean, everything just worked fantastically. And going back to my original point at the beginning of this discussion that we're having here, I'll tell you, I really wanted to see that all of those capabilities were wrapped up in a product that made it easy for different constituents or user groups within the environment, whether it's the SOC analyst or the IR team or the threat hunting team, or even the desktop team to some degree. Everybody could find value there without having to completely retool and go dig around a lot. And that's exactly what we found. So it was super easy to use. We had some very cool scenarios that I felt that, you know, they were pretty realistic. So we weren't, you know, just making things up as we went. This was stuff that's sort of based on experiences of both the Carbon Black team and the SANS team. And it gives you just an enormous amount of things within one product. And that is a great thing for organizations. That, you know, there is a need to get away from just having products and endpoint agents and things all over the place to try to accomplish all these goals. So we definitely enjoyed it, had a lot of fun going through it. And with that, I am going to hand it off.
All right, perfect. So Dave, just to make sure before I get too far into this, can everyone hear me all right?
I can hear you great.
Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Dave, for that fantastic review of the capabilities that exist within the Predictive Security Cloud. It's been a real pleasure working with you guys, and I'm really glad to hear that everything went smoothly for you guys, especially since I'm the one who built a lot of that resource out. So what I'm going to do today for the folks on the call is I'd like to go through and talk a little bit about some of the things that Dave covered through his review, why we thought it was actually necessary to create the Predictive Security Cloud and start consolidating that security, and some of that's very familiar to us. But really, I'd like to talk about how the Predictive Security Cloud does the types of things that Dave was talking about. And then I'll go in and actually show you a few of those things with some clarifying points in the console itself. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So Dave already kind of covered the situation at the top of the webinar, right? Looking at things like ineffective prevention, the fact that tools have been falling behind for a very long time, especially signature or hash-based tools, as attackers learn to swiftly change their malware or even go completely fileless or malwareless in their attacks. A hash-based solution doesn't work. And so we've been adding more and more tools, as Dave pointed out, and that leads to a lot of escalating complexity, not only at the endpoint itself, as we consume more resources with more tools at the endpoint, but also going right back to our teams. We always have a limited capability on our teams to handle more than I'd say probably 5 or 6 tools as we start going through. People try to learn more than that and things can start to get confusing. And when I talk to people, my official title at Carbon Black is as the technical marketing manager, but I also am a security strategist there. So I have a lot of conversations just with people in the general security industry. I talk to a lot of people who are running anywhere from 6 to 12 discrete endpoint solutions, and their teams are trying to manage and juggle all of that. And so they end up with that kind of problem where they're drowning in alerts. They aren't really able to sort through things very quickly, and they're trying to correlate between different tools. And because we have that lack of qualified staff, I've never talked to a single security professional who said they had just the right amount of money and just the right amount of people on their team. They always need more. We have that lack of qualified staff that compounds all of these problems. And so Carbon Black looked at that and said, well, we can fix this using all of the experience that we have in the industry and build a consolidated endpoint protection platform. So what we built out was the Predictive Security Cloud, and that's built on a layer of collective intelligence coming from all of the endpoints we secure around the world, our first-party research, our behavioral monitoring, our tactics, techniques, and procedures, but also third-party coming from all of our partnerships and all the intelligence that they bring. It all comes into the Predictive Security Cloud, and we can monitor all those endpoints using that intelligence and continuously analyze. And so we took that and we built it into a single lightweight agent. That's one of the things that's most important when you're talking about this kind of consolidation. We're not just consolidating into a single backend, we're consolidating all these tools down to a single agent, a single process on that machine, so that you can get everything that you need here, your next-gen AV and EDR, managed alert monitoring and triage, which is something that Dave really didn't get to play around with. It was a little bit out of scope, as he said, for some other things with the review, but our professional team monitoring these things, looking at your environments and helping you understand what's going on. Real-time endpoint query and remediation, the OSQuery integration that he talked about with live query, I'll show you that as well. But then advanced threat hunting, virtual data center security, being able to secure all of your endpoints and servers with that single agent and get all of these tools out of that single console. It helps all of your teams work together with a single source of truth so that they're all speaking the same language and they can quickly move from one type of process to the next. But the way that we actually do that, our unique approach, is around analyzing endpoint behavior. And you saw this in some of the screenshots that Dave had up. So by looking at endpoint behavior, we're moving beyond hashes and we're even moving beyond IOCs, or indicators of compromise. By looking at behaviors, we're kind of abstracting all of that out a level. So the way that this works is by taking all of the endpoints we secure and continuously monitoring and recording. This is one of the most important points to make around the way the PSC functions, is that it's a continuous recording solution. We're not doing regular scans. We're not doing anything like that. We don't have to do a scan to find malware on your machine. We're always monitoring. The moment a piece of malware drops, we can immediately assess that it's malware and quarantine it without having to do a scan. So we take all of that continuously recorded data and we look at the behaviors between these different processes so that we can find the ways attackers are trying to influence your endpoints. And those become the behavioral models that Dave talked about a little bit, where he went in and said, hey, Excel is not allowed to invoke a command interpreter. Not only are we creating those kinds of behavioral models, but we're also giving you the power to create customized ones for your environment. So that as we see these attacks coming through and we look at these behavioral models, the endpoint sensor itself knows to stop these before they can actually progress to the point that they're doing real damage to your environment. So we can stay ahead of that emerging attack trend and stop never before seen attacks because we see these behaviors coming and we know to step in and stop them before they do that damage. And then we pair that, all of that, with the actual intelligence from the boots on the ground. It's the way I like to put it. I come from a military background. I was in the intelligence community in the Marine Corps, and I did a lot of threat hunting for the Marine Corps, just not necessarily within the cyberspace, but really looking at generalized intelligence. I did a lot of threat hunting, trying to find needles in haystacks. And one of the best resources you can ever have is having a community of intelligence around you. We weren't isolated in our search. I had other intelligence teams that were helping me and other organizations that came in so that I could always better myself and look at the intelligence they were gathering. So when you look at the user exchange community, I've highlighted a couple really important stats, and this is just from the last year, right? Looking at 92 internal threat notifications that we posted at Carbon Black. So Carbon Black proactively identifying 92 extremely unique threats that we thought were important enough to automatically raise to all of our members and say, this is brand new, it's never been seen, you need to go check your environment for this kind of thing right now. But when we take a look at those 20,000 plus community members that are all leveraging this, they also produced themselves 425 pieces of community-based threat intel. So going in as they found threats that were unique to them, and you could divide this up, let's say just by financial sector. Someone working within the user exchange who works at a finance-based company could go and find other users who are also in the finance industry and say, what kind of threats are they seeing so that I can look for those uniquely in my own. And you could bring this right back to a couple of great examples that we had within the user exchange around things like the strains of ransomware that were pretty recent in everyone's memory, right? Looking at things like Petya and NotPetya, within an hour or so of those types of advanced attacks hitting, we had dozens, if not hundreds, of threat intelligence reports within the community from our members saying, these are the ways that you can go find this particular strain of this piece of ransomware. And that came from places that had huge built out SOC teams or huge analysis teams that were able to spend the time and resources to say, I'm going to get this piece of malware myself and analyze it, and then I'll turn that intelligence around to the rest of the community. So it allows you to better your own security posture by making use of resources at other organizations. So the user exchange is a really key foundational part of what we do, especially when it comes to sharing that intelligence and making sure everyone can work towards a better goal. And because everyone is using that common platform of the Predictive Security Cloud, they're all speaking the same language. There's no need to do translation in between the two. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the console really quickly, just so I can take some of the things that Dave talked about and show them in a little bit more of a real sense for you and draw some real highlights to some of the things that we're looking at. So taking a look at the console, as Dave first pointed out, right, the dashboard when you log in, a simplified, easy to understand interface that allows you to see the threats that are in your environment, where they're coming from, how far along they've progressed, and what the Predictive Security Cloud is actually doing about them. So looking at things like attacks by vector and being able to jump into these graphs to say, well, I have web-based threats that are popping up in my environment. Let me go find out what those are so that I can get better web security and start building policy around that. Or email, removable media, remote drives, other network protocols is one of my favorites. As a security researcher and a security strategist, a lot of people that I talk to will always have at least a small incident somewhere in their past based on just they had a tool that required a specific port. They got rid of that tool and forgot to close that specific port off. And so someone found that and was able to get into their environment or was able to abuse it for some reason, even if it was an internal user who knew just a little bit too much, using that to try and bypass internal security controls. Almost everyone I've talked to has seen something like that. But as we look at these things, some of the stuff that I want to draw your attention to on this dashboard is looking at the difference between suspicious activity and attacks that have been stopped. As we're tracking these, because we are continuously monitoring and recording, we're always looking at what's happening in this environment. We can see things like non-malware. Now, non-malware, I tend to call dual purpose tools. So things that could be easily turned against you, used against you, like PowerShell. We could monitor PowerShell's behavior and see that it's doing things that are highly suspicious, but it's not actually causing damage at the endpoint yet. And so we're not going to go in and step in to stop it because we don't want to overstep the bounds here of what's necessary for your environment to keep you secure until you go in and build that kind of policy. So we look at this, we say PowerShell is behaving very suspiciously, and you could click in and see those kinds of events. But the moment that it does try and do something that will lead to damage, we'll immediately push it up to the attack stopped section. So let's actually take a look at some of these alerts a little bit. Now I've simplified my console down here. I've cleared out a lot of data just so that you can see the things that are relevant to what you need to see for this webinar. But taking a look at this alert right here, as we move towards simplification, one of the things that we really wanted to do is say, with this NGAV side of things, we need to make it as easy as possible for someone to understand what's happening in their environment immediately and start to act on it. And so the alert that you see here was actually built by the Predictive Security Cloud. It's another really great feature of the Predictive Security Cloud is that the alerts that we build out of this aren't human modified. These are being built by the actual backend engine of the Predictive Security Cloud. So looking at something like a PS1 file, attempting to modify user data and it's potentially ransomware, so we apply a terminate policy. Now this is the exact attack that Dave was able to see in the environment that we set up for him. But as we look at this, Dave showed being able to go into a graph to look at everything that happened across the course of this alert. But something that's also really important about this is being able to handle the alert directly from the alerts page. When you're very busy, you have a lot of alerts to go through or other tasks to handle. Sometimes you just need to be able to see an alert, handle it right now, and you can circle back around later to do some more in-depth research. So we can see right here, we've got the process of that PS1 file. And I can actually go into my actions and I could go in there and say, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at that and virus total or delete that application. Now, this is currently a process that I have whitelisted in my environment because I use this for demonstrations quite a bit and I like to show it running to completion sometimes. But looking at that company whitelist and saying, hey, if this is a process that I have internal to myself, this is a script that I wrote, I can make sure that the system never tries to stop that again by adding it to my whitelist. And we can even do things like handle that device action right here by saying, hey, let's go ahead and quarantine my device until I can circle back around and do some more research on this. And then we can also dive into that endpoint itself, as Dave was showing, and take a look at everything that actually happened across the course of that alert, looking at things like scheduled tasks being created, or again, PowerShell trying to encrypt those files. And as Dave showed, being able to look at the behaviors themselves. So in this case, PowerShell was terminated because it tried to access all of the data files on the machine and then send that data to encryption. And then from there, being able to actually use that Go Live console that Dave was talking about to actually dive in and handle any of these things that we see. You click on that button and it'll immediately bring you in. Looks like my network's giving me some trouble there. It'll bring you into that console that you can just connect to the machine automatically and start working with that computer. But Dave also mentioned that he looked at this through a couple different lenses. So looking at someone like an analyst, someone who's dealing with these kinds of alerts, they see an alert, they have to understand what happened immediately and move on, versus the role of someone who's actually doing threat hunting. And with threat hunting, using that investigations page, we make it easy to sift through all this data. So we're taking that continuously recorded event data and we give you the ability to search through it with a really powerful, simple search interface. It's really a lot like Google, being able to get in there and find anything that happened in your environment. So one of the things that I recently cooked up for being able to show off the threat hunting side of this is actually being able to look for processes like something like Notepad in an environment, calling out to child processes like QUser. And the reason this is something that's important is because Notepad and QUser share a common program path within the Microsoft architecture, which means that if I can get into a machine and compromise an instance of Notepad, I can actually scrape memory out of QUser so that I can find things like user accounts that have been logged into that machine. So this could be a brand new piece of threat intel that's never been reported on before, but it's just something I have a hunch about. Or maybe I heard some security researchers talking about how this could be possible. I can go find that kind of activity in my environment and immediately be able to dive in and see exactly what happened here. And the reason this is important is because we're moving beyond that step of just saying, here's an alert and the information that's contextually relevant to just this alert. Now we're diving into a threat hunter's point of view where we can see all of the information, everything that's happened around this. So Notepad did call out to QUser, but it also called out to a command prompt in the environment to make registry changes there. And I can click on those and see over on that command line exactly which registry key was touched and what they tried to change. And I can also look at that kind of information across all these processes. Down at the bottom, we actually have all of the data. And it's taking a second to load in here for me, but looking at the data that we have coming across here and saying, hey, what kinds of file modifications or network connections were created off of this process and being able to filter in to just that type of data. And then finally, to look at this, as Dave mentioned, he looked at it from a desktop administrator's perspective, but looking at things like LiveQuery. Now, this is, again, an important thing to point out. This is all out of the same process and the same sensor on that endpoint. It's a single process and a single sensor that's running. LiveQuery gives me the ability to look for anything across my endpoints and find things in real time. So as opposed to looking at historically recorded data, I can see what's there right now. And I saw in that last threat hunt that I did that someone turned off the local firewall in the registry. So I can run a quick query for that. And I've already got that opened up right here with my results. And I queried a few different endpoints to see what's the state of that registry key in my environment right now. And I can see that it was actually turned off for one user, and then 2 of my users don't even have this registry key present on their machine at all. So these are things I need to be able to go in and fix. And I can, again, do that through that live response tab. I click on that button, and it'll immediately take me into that live response session. And to show you that kind of power for live response, as we look at these things, I can take something quite simple like that registry command. I can go back to my live query key, copy that in, and I can just say, hey, go ahead and take that key and set the D word back to 1 so that I can actually rectify the problems that I see in my environment directly through that console. And it's important to point out that, as Dave mentioned, we have a very robust API that goes back to the Predictive Security Cloud. And these kinds of things can be automated in your environment through that API so that you're always able to find these and immediately fix them without really having to do much work on your own, because the API can handle all of that for you. And the final thing that I want to touch on and draw some more attention to here is looking at the live query page. It's probably one of the greatest examples I could show you of the actual user exchange, is not only being able to build queries directly out of here, or if you'd like to build really robust SQL queries. In fact, I've got one that I built right here that's a pretty advanced SQL query looking for hash values of anything that's in startup or scheduled task that's potentially got the name of Google in it. Pull back all those hash values for me so that I can go and query those on my own through something like VirusTotal. But we also have the ability to look at those sample queries, and that'll drive you directly to our user exchange page. We've got things like IT hygiene and other different processes broken down for these. Do you want to look for compliance queries, incident response, vulnerability management? And the important thing is that this is a tool that's not just built for desktop admins, it's also built for your security teams. If we look across some of these are very important, looking at things like shared resources in an environment or mounted file systems. An attacker could come in and mount his own shared resource to that machine so that he can start exfiltrating data. Being able to run this query very quickly in your environment and see what kinds of resources are attached to my computers is incredibly important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go ahead and hand things back over to our moderator, and we're going to take a look at some of the questions that I'm sure people might have in this environment.
All right, thank you so much for that great presentation. We have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is, how do we differentiate between where endpoint behavior and user peer group behavior anomaly detection? Is Carbon Black predictive capable of both or just for endpoints?
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit. You broke up a little bit at the beginning of that question, so I missed it.
Okay, I'm going to put it in your questions window now too.
Okay.
How do we differentiate between where endpoint behavior and user peer group behavior anomaly detection? It's not really, I'm not sure it's phrased correctly, but is Carbon Black predictive capable of both or just for endpoints?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, what you're looking for there is the differentiation between endpoint behavior and the behavior of the actual user itself. So the Predictive Security Cloud is looking at endpoint behavior itself. We're not doing things like analyzing what do your users typically do and building profiles directly for your organization. The reason being that can quickly lead you down a path where things are being approved in your organization automatically that you wouldn't want otherwise approved, or things can end up being blacklisted that you wouldn't otherwise want blacklisted. But what we do is we make it incredibly easy through that kind of the policy build out that Dave talked about a little bit. Not only is it not just an on-off toggle, we give you in-depth ability to see what your policy is affecting, but you can also use that to build those custom policies that are really unique to your organization to say, hey, this group over here doesn't actually ever need to access PowerShell on their own. So I'm going to take most PowerShell functionality away from them and only leave it in the hands of a group over here. So we give you the ability to do that, and we can then control that at the endpoint, but we're not doing the kind of building out of that profile of what user activity looks like for your organization. As I mentioned, that can get into some dicey areas when you're looking at turning that kind of control directly over to an entirely machine system.
All right, thank you. What are the logging capabilities? Easy to feed into a SIM?
Yes, absolutely. So we actually have connectors built out for several major SIM platforms. Splunk is one that comes right off the top of my head. But we actually take all of the data that's collected by the Predictive Security Cloud, and we can immediately transport that over to a SIM of your choice. So if you have your own data lake set up or a SIM that you're utilizing, it's very simple within the console. You can actually just go in there and say that you have a SIM, and then give us the proper connections to that SIM, and we can start taking this data and immediately porting it over to that SIM for you. So you can do your own customized analysis or just storing in a data lake if that's something that you want to do. And we can work with pretty much any SIM that's out there on the market. I've yet to come across one that we are not able to transport our data to.
All right, thank you. Are there on-prem solutions to avoid individual systems reaching out to the cloud?
Yes. So we actually at Carbon Black have a couple other products. They're not directly part of the Predictive Security Cloud, but some products called Carbon Black Protection or Carbon Black Response, CB Protection and CB Response. Those are both on-prem solutions. So if you have machines that require an on-premise solution because they are not able to or allowed to by policy connect to the internet at large, then you can utilize those solutions on premise to lock those systems down and get the same kind of in-depth visibility. So we do have that available as an option if it's something that your organization requires.
All right, thank you. What is the target customer audience for Carbon Black?
The target audience for Carbon Black is actually pretty broad. We go down to 100 endpoints as an organization, and we scale all the way up into the tens of thousands. We have some customers with tens of thousands of endpoints that are deployed across their organization, looking at their endpoints, their servers, everything that they're protecting with the Predictive Security Cloud and the suite of products that Carbon Black offers out of it. So we go all the way, like I said, down from that small business up to the very large. And the reason that we're able to do that is because the Predictive Security Cloud is built around simplifying things and meeting your security posture and maturity where your organization sits. If you have a very small team, I have many people that I talk to who utilize this tool who it's really just them and maybe one other guy, or just them on their own. They use that NGAV side of things because it makes it easy for them to see what's going on, understand those alerts, and immediately better their security policy. And then you go up to the organizations with tens of thousands of endpoints, and they have huge SOCs and huge teams built out and resource to throw at their security problems. And they're leveraging the full suite. They're looking at everything that's available in the Predictive Security Cloud and using that for in-depth threat hunting. The great thing about the way that Carbon Black does this is because it's a collective resource with the Predictive Security Cloud and because of the user exchange, that 100-person business that has only one guy running their security is able to benefit from the types of research that these large customers we have are doing, because that's not only feeding into the Predictive Security Cloud, but also back into the user exchange so that they can apply that kind of security directly to their organization. So the target is anywhere from 100 all the way up. We can scale to as many endpoints as your organization would have.
Okay, thank you. Someone writes, is the entire process, and it says ancestry, available for user-specified alerting rules?
If I'm understanding the question, it's worded a little bit confusingly for me, but
Yeah.
It sounds like you're asking, is that entire kind of alert process behavior or the entire history, can you build custom alerts out of that? And the answer is absolutely you can. So looking at custom alerting within the NGAV side, you can look for specific behaviors, you can look for specific patterns of behavior or attack that you've seen in your organization and build custom alerts out of that. And on the threat hunting side, we also have the ability to build what we call a watch list. It's a customized indicator of compromise for your environment. So you can take that grandparent process, child process relationship that we're able to establish and all of the ancillary information we could put in there, and you could build a custom watch list to alert you anytime a specific pattern of behavior or a specific pattern of processes is seen in your environment. So that entire scope of an attack, the entire life cycle, is absolutely available for you to create your own custom alerts in the console.
All right, thanks. Carbon Black Response currently has threat feeds. Are these still present in the PSC?
Yes, they absolutely are. So what this asker is talking about is the CB Response, the on-prem tool that we have, has individualized threat feeds, which are essentially lists of what I was just talking about, watch lists that are created by third-party organizations and by Carbon Black themselves. And those are also part of Threat Hunter. So you can actually use in the Predictive Security Cloud, you can go into the watch list page and you can select which watch list you'd like to run in your environment, and that search will automatically begin. So a watch list continuously looks at all of that activity and will flag the moment that something matches one of the hits on the watch list. So those threat intel feeds are part of the Predictive Security Cloud. You are able to customize which ones you're leveraging in your environment. And you can actually now go in and directly influence what specific pieces of a threat intel feed might interest you. For example, something like the attack framework feed. There might be a lot on the attack framework feed. that is noisier than you want it to be, or it's flagging processes in your own environment simply because that's the way that attack monitors for different patterns in that environment. So you can go in and actually granularly customize which pieces of a threat intel feed you want to use in your environment. So yes, that does exist.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Dave and Tristan, for your great presentation, and to Carbon Black for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.